The cyber psychology seminar series is designed to showcase the many different facets of research and scholarship within the field of cyber psychology. The series features some of the nation's leading experts at the emerging intersection of psychology and technology. Today's speaker is Dr. John Tawa. He is an assistant professor in the Psychology and Education Department at Mount Holyoke College. Dr. Tawa's research examines the role of race in intergroup interactions. He has two general lines of research. First, he has conducted research on the impact of perceived competition for resources on relations between minority groups. The second line of Dr. Tawa's research examines the ways in which people's essentialist beliefs about race influence their intergroup behavior. Methodologically, Dr. Tawa is interested in the use of technology to directly assess people's real-time behavior in lieu of a primary reliance on self-reported behavior. In a study on resource competition, Dr. Tawa's participants created self-resembling avatars and interacted in social events in the virtual world of Second Life. He is currently in the process of developing a study using virtual reality to examine racial bias in police decisions to use lethal force. The title of Dr. Tawa's talk today is Virtually Immersive Reality for the Study of Racial Bias in Police Use of Force. I welcome you today, Dr. Tawa, as our speaker in our seminar series, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ansis, and thank you to you and the New Jersey Institute of Technology for inviting me to talk about this research. I'm really excited to share it with you all today. It's something that I've been working on now for a couple of years in the making at Mount Holyoke College in terms of getting the technology working and leaning heavily on my computer science students who are brilliant in terms of developing this program and then beginning to collect data. And the way the timing has gone, because of this pandemic, it's kind of shut down data collection, which then made it kind of an obvious time to start analyzing some data. So what I'm saying is that I've just started doing some analyses on this data, and what we're seeing is quite interesting. And so this is a really cool time for me to have an opportunity to share it with you all. It's in an early stage, and so just getting a chance to hear feedback from people is really helpful. Related to that, by the way, if there are people who are comfortable having their cameras on, I'd love that. I love the chance to be talking to people, and even if it's nonverbal, might help me a little if I'm need to clarify something. I won't be able to see all of you anyway, because in a moment I'm going to be sharing my screen, but it'd be nice to see the faces. So thank you all for this opportunity. I'm going to also I'm going to try to keep this relatively short to 30, 35 minutes, again, because I really welcome the feedback. All right, so now I'm going to share my slides. Is everybody able to see this?
Yes, I see it.
Okay. That's great. All right. So I made this slide. Always once I start talking about the research and the statistics and the technology, it just always makes me feel like I'm getting a little far away from the people's lives who inspire this research. And so I wanted to make a slide like this just to honor those people, take a moment to honor them. These are all Black men and women who have lost their lives to police violence while being unarmed. And you know, what strikes me about this is I made this slide about a year ago, and I'm just thinking, you know, if I was to sit down and make this slide even a year later, there would be very different names on here. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. I mean, just how quickly that would change. And to be very clear, these are all high profile cases. You know, these are, you know, not even representative of just the vast numbers of Black men and women that have lost their lives to police violence. And so, you know, it's just striking to me how different the slide would look even a year later. You know, so the other thing I want to point out here is just to be very clear on my perspective, that, and a perspective I share with many people, that this is not at all a new problem in the Black community. This, we know, has been going on for decades and decades, centuries even, and that it's the recent attention to it is really a result of media attention to it, which I think can be a good thing, that we are beginning to become very familiar with these names, and because of this media attention, action is happening, and again, I think that's a good thing. One of the things that I think has been very interesting and good is open source record keeping around lethal encounters, and some of you may know this, but the Washington Post, for example, since early in 2015 has been keeping a database of deaths by police gun. And so what it is just an open source database. You can access it right now on the internet. And it's a simple Excel sheet. It has every death recorded, and then a limited number of variables, but important ones. First of all, the race of the person, whether or not they were armed, were they running away, were they shot, and so this is an open data set. And what I want to share with you before I get into my own research is just some me poking around in these numbers, and let's see these disparities. Okay, and so I want to share some of those with you. And now, if you look at that complete data set, at the time I did it, there were 500 plus deaths in there, which is an egregious number in itself. 25% of those in that database were Black or African American. So what does that mean in terms of disparities? Well, the Black American population in the US, about 13%. That's like a twofold increase, okay? Then I looked at the percentage who were unarmed when they were killed by police. 10% of the Black victims in that database were unarmed. What does that mean? Well, compared that to among the white victims who were killed by police, that was about 5%. Again, about a twofold increase. And then I looked at this variable, the number that were fleeing on foot. And this might be obvious, but the reason I'm interested in that is that that is, in my mind, a situation where it would be difficult to justify the use of lethal force. Well, that was 19% of the Black victims in that database were that were killed fleeing on foot were Black. About 9 or 10% of the white victims were killed by police. This is kind of an eerie, this like twofold increase kept coming up in these numbers, and I was trying to get a sense of how much of a disparity that is, if that makes sense. One thing that I know from my work in clinical psychology, for example, is that African Americans are way overdiagnosed with schizophrenia, and so I was poking around a little bit, and those numbers are about that there's like a 1.3 times overdiagnosis of Black or African Americans for diagnosis of schizophrenia. This is almost double that disparity, if that makes sense. But this is egregious. Okay, so that's one way to look at how bad the problem is. And I just want to reiterate here just how powerful this data is, because it's not processed through any. I mean, you could do this right now. You could go to this data set. No researcher has to kind of, this hasn't been filtered through anybody except me at this time, but I'm inviting you all to do the same. Okay, so what's another way to look at disparities? Well, the field of psychology and social psychology in particular has done great work in the last 10, 15 years, bringing this phenomenon into the lab. And so the power of that is, can you see if these disparities play out in real time in a lab setting? And the way that's been done is primarily using stimuli like this. So what these are photographs of either Black or white men with either weapons or benign objects. And many of you have heard of an implicit association test. A program was developed in around 2002 that by Joshua Correll. And it is similar to an IAT in that one of these images will pop up on your screen and you need to make a decision about whether or not to shoot. And in that way, researchers can see, for example, are there disparities in who is, do people tend to shoot Black suspects more? Also, like the implicit association test is a reaction timer, so we can see, are they quicker to shoot Black suspects? And yeah, just to kind of look at the scope of this research, all these citations are studies supporting these findings that, yeah, there definitely are disparities in terms of people's likelihood to shoot Black suspects. These terms, so for example, lower threshold for shooting essentially means that people tend to favor a shooting response whether or not it's the correct answer, whether or not they're armed or unarmed. And that bias is obviously more so with Black suspects versus white suspects. Sensitivity in this context means just more errors, that they're more likely to make the wrong choice, whether that is shooting an unarmed victim or not shooting someone who's armed with Black suspects. So one way to interpret that is more difficulty teasing apart whether the object is a weapon or a benign object when it's in the hand of Black suspects, and faster reaction times. And so all of these citations support this. What I want to really just kind of make the point here is that the field of psychology and social psychology in particular has corroborated record statistics and demonstrate through and through again and again that, yeah, this bias is real and it can be reproduced in a lab setting. So what do I have to offer? What does my research lab have to offer? Where do we come in? And that's the application of virtual reality. And so what I want to talk a bit about today is what can we offer in VR that you can't do using like a computer simulation program. And I think the answer largely is in being able to explore the psychological processes that are occurring while those decisions are happening. So, for example, the VR headset that I have, allows you to record like a 360-degree scene in video. It immerses the person inside that suspect encounter. The person who is needing to make a decision about whether or not to use lethal force, they're immersed in it. They don't actually know who the suspect is. The suspect might approach from behind. They might approach from the side. And so it really allows people to be immersed in quite realistic scenarios. We're able to do things like eye tracking within it so we can see what people are attending to. We're able to look at, for example, their level of physiological stress building as they're leading up to the decisions. And so really the question here is not so much, is there bias? That's been established. There is racial bias in police officers' decisions to use lethal force. What I'm interested in is what is happening within the police officer psychology that results in bias. And then if we can determine that, can we then reverse engineer and could we focus interventions based on what we are now learning about what's happening psychologically? Okay, all right, so I have this first scene here that I'm gonna play this, and what this is a recording of a person interacting in the scene from their perspective. And so if you've not done VR before, you can imagine you kind of put on a headset and suddenly you're immersed in this 360-degree world. That world is a 30-second video that we filmed with a 360 camera. And if you look to your right, you'll see what the camera saw to the right. If you look to your left, okay. The other thing that I'll point out here is that you'll see it's floating. It's a handgun. It's a police-issued handgun. That is the controller that the person is holding. And there is a trigger on the controller, and they use that to make the shooting decision. There's a red laser, which looks a little unrealistic. I'll talk about why we have that laser pointer in there as well. Okay, so what I just kind of want you to try to feel this a little bit, like, what would you do in this decision? It's going to be about 30 seconds long, and you need to make, imagine that you're holding a handgun and you need to make a decision about whether or not to shoot as I play this. You may recognize the actor in the scene as well.
Turn around, put your hands behind your back.
Can I just make a phone call real quick? I've showed this sample scene to a variety of audiences, and then I always say how many people would have shot. That was me, by the way. I've not heard one person said I shot you. But yeah, we see this. We see it happen all the time and with our participants. They're surprised, they shoot, and that makes me feel strange, seeing myself shot. Okay. So, by the way, this is not one of the scenes. This is a practice scene that they're exposed to give them an idea of the rule, of how they're supposed to proceed through this program. I want to show you this other scene. This isn't going to play into the analyses at all, but the reason I want to show you this is I think that it really kind of illustrates the scope of the kinds of behaviors that we can study in this. And I want to be clear that we haven't analyzed all these. It's a demonstration. I have a list here on the side. It's occluded by your faces for the moment, but yeah, these are things that eventually we could use this data to look at, like how does aiming predict? How does targeting? The reason for that laser is we could, for example, look at is there disparities in where shots are fired? In other words, are there more head and torso or lethal shots made with black suspects, with white suspects? Reaction time, what are the decisions to shoot? We're going to see in a little bit later some of the physiological stress data live, and also some of the eye tracking. But for this one, I want to talk about that first variable, which we have not done analyses on, but is a possibility. And I picked this scene because this, I think, is an example of someone who's very aggressively aiming at a suspect. And I think you'll see that. And so this is a scene where a person has been pulled over. You're the police officer, you're at their driver's side window. They appear distressed, and you're asking for their license. Instead, they start the car and begin to try to get away. And just before they do that, they reach in the glove compartment and pull out a gun. And so in this case, the correct decision here would be to shoot the suspect. What I want you to pay attention to, though, is just how fast, like, that's the right decision, but this would be a remarkably fast reaction time, and I think one that could ultimately lead to errors. You're going to hear, this is, again, a recording of a participant, a real live participant interacting in this scene. There's a lot of background noise in this. That is me talking to a custodian in the place where we were administering this data. We're like talking about martial arts or something. It's like, I wish it wasn't in the recording, but hey, that's what all that noise is. But again, so let me just kind of give you a little heads up here. They are going to shoot the suspect. So there is going to be a loud bang. You're going to hear the gun noise, just so that no one is startled. You may be startled, but just so you know that that's coming. There's no blood or guts here. When a shot happens, the scene ends.
Everybody came and drove off because I don't want to set up the sports bus or have self-defense class, so we can't do it. We're trying to stay ahead of the game.
fast.
But we're gonna have to go a little more.
Very well, give me your license and registration. This won't take that long.
What they do is, what we have a set up for, which sort of all the Wi-Fi stuff. She wants it all hardwired. So they hardwired across the board.
Driver, turn up the car and put your hands on the steering wheel.
Or the go there.
Yeah, so this is a situation where, you know, ultimately we might, for example, look at aggressiveness in aiming and in terms of shooting outcomes and errors. Again, in this case, that would be the right decision. All right, so what I want to share is sort of our process here. The first thing we did was we collected a sample of 20 pilot participants from Mount Holyoke College. And these were like a pilot. We were still working out a lot of glitches in the program at this time, so none of this data ended up getting folded into the analyses that I'm going to share. But what it did was it gave us an opportunity to do basically like a qualitative analysis of their screen recording. So we, in my lab, would watch over these recordings. And during these pilot administrations, we kept on, we kept what's called a reticule on. In other words, we could see what they're seeing. You'll see some of these in a little bit, like a little dot, which is basically what they're looking at. And we took that off for like the more complete data set. But you'll get a chance to see what they're seeing. And then, and we also made a visual graph of their physiological stress. And so we could kind of actually watch how anxiety and attention interacted and led up to decisions. And based on watching these videos, came up with this model, which then we are now in the process of putting to test. And it's a very simple cognitive affective model. And the way that it works is that what we're seeing is that, yeah, physiological stress, when people become stressed out, it seems to affect their attention patterns, which in turn affects their decision making. Very simple. But so a couple of things here. How we're currently measuring stress is through heart rate variability. The headset that we have also has pupil dilation measurements in it. We're in the process now of figuring out how to do that analysis. I think that'll be even more specific to each scene. But for the moment, heart rate variability. The outcome measures of bias could be things like reaction time, the same threshold sensitivity responses that we saw earlier. All right, the thing that we're seeing, and what I mean by attention patterns is, and again, at this stage, it's a hypothesis. It's developed from qualitative analyses, but that we are seeing two maladaptive attention patterns emerging from when people get stressed out. And one is like a disorganization that people, you know, and I'll show you a scene of this where their attention's going all over the place. And it really leads, like you can imagine if you're looking over here and you swing your head over here and then someone's there, it's like they appear suddenly, and it can lead to, I think, startle responses, and it looks like it's leading to bad decision making. The other one is like, if you think about this as a spectrum, the total opposite direction, where people who become anxious, they fixate, they like lock in on one thing, a suspect typically, and as a consequence, you know, you're really not then able to pick up on all the other cues within the context that could give you cues about what's the correct decision. And so again, I'll show you an example of this pattern. But that somewhere in the middle of that is this kind of what we would call like fluid attention, where there seems to be an organization in terms of how people are looking. It's not all over the place, it's not chaotic, but it is, you know, this seems like a good attention pattern. And so I want to show you an example of that first. And, you know, over here, you're going to see this person's stress level. Yeah, one thing to note is that this person is starting at a relatively high level of stress as a baseline, but there's no increase in their stress level. You know, you should be anxious, I think, in a situation like this. You're dealing with, needing to make a decision about somebody's life. What you're not going to see is a spike. You're going to see that. You can look at that number 78. I don't know if it ends up close to 78 by the time the 30 seconds are over. But what I want you to pay attention to is, in this case, you will see the reticule, which is the dot, and it indicates what they're looking at. And so this scene is going to open with you as the police officer kind of temporarily detaining somebody against a wall and waiting for backup. That person's been accused of stealing a wallet. Okay, and you're asking them to hang on a second, and then they're going to run, and you're going to chase them. And then they're going to get cornered, and then they're going to turn around and they're holding up the wallet, okay, which some people perceive as a gun. This person's not going to shoot. They're going to make the correct decision. And what I want you to pay attention to is their attention pattern, because it's what I think is a good example of an organized attention pattern. They're looking at the suspect. You'll see them at one point look towards their hip, probably looking to see if they could detect a gun. They're going to take 1 second to look around them to scan the area. Then they're going to look back at the suspect. They're going to give chase. When the suspect brings the wallet out, you're going to see them actually look at the wallet. And so this plays out nicely, I think, as a good example of fluid attention.
You match the description of the suspect who allegedly stole a woman's wallet. If you're innocent, you have nothing to worry about, right? Tell us, sir. I have backup on the way.
I think this is a good example of fluid attention. By the way, I forgot to say this. If some of you are wondering, methodologically, what we did here is we filmed 12 of these different scenarios. When we showed up at the scene to film them, we had 2 actors, one black, one white, and so we'd film the scene twice with the different actors. So same exact scene, but they would exchange clothes. So basically everything's the same except for the race of the suspect, and that will enable us to look at differential analysis. Okay. Alrighty. So just kind of go back to this model. So that is kind of that center path of fluid attention. But what I've also suggested that there seems to be these more maladaptive attention patterns, and we're going to see an example of that disorganization pattern in the next slide. And so let me just tell you what's happening in this scene. The participant will get a prompt, like a text prompt right before each scene that puts them in context a little bit, says what's going on. So in this case, they say, hey, there's been a robbery, and you as a police officer are interviewing a witness. So the young woman that you're going to see in the very beginning of the scene is a witness to this robbery, and you're asking her questions. She's going to be describing it, oh, he's like this tall, this kind of thing. Now, from the left, this male is going to approach. And when we were filming this, we decided like he's going to kind of be drunk, like he's sort of uninhibited, just kind of stagger up to the police officer. And he's got his phone in his hand, and he's going to say, hey, officer, can you, he's using his GPS or something, or a map. Can you tell me where Dole Street is? That's the way this scene was to be filmed. Like all of these scenes, what we tried to create was sort of like an ambiguous scenario, which could be misinterpreted. And so that's what you're gonna see happening. But the things I don't want you to pay attention to here are that, one, that stress level is gonna really spike just in the 30 seconds. Now it's at 45, which is lower than the other person, but by the time this 30 seconds is over, that's going to be up to like 65 or something like that. All right. And so, and the other thing is that they're going to really start kind of like swinging their head left and right. And now this guy is going to approach from the left. And if you think about it, he's approaching from some distance. If the person had a more steady attention pattern, this person is gradually approaching, it gives you time, but because they're swinging their head around left to right, the person suddenly appears to the left, and he's going to be shot, which is the wrong decision in this instance.
Can you describe him for me? How tall was he?
I don't know, maybe.
Big guy,
Okay, so this is what we consider a disorganized attention pattern. Okay, and then this is the sort of other path that we're seeing, and we're going to call this fixation. This is just an overly fixated response. And again, the idea here is that what seems to be happening is that people become so zeroed in on a single person, or that they're not really paying attention to the cues. And so what we're going to see in this is there's a young woman that's sitting on a set of stairs, and she appears to be crying. The prompt says that this woman has a restraining order out on her former partner, and so she's over to the left. All the way over to the right, a car pulls up, and a young man gets out and begins walking on this road right here towards her, and he has his hands behind his back, and at some point she looks up and notices him when he's pretty close, and he pulls his hand out from behind his back, and he's got flowers. He's apparently trying to make up for something. And so, but what I really want you to pay attention to is just the person is scanning, and when they see him coming out of the car, that's it. That's the only thing that they're going to look at. And this is a very fixated attention response pattern. And again, when he pulls out the flowers, he's going to be shot. And that is, of course, the wrong decision. That's the car he's going to come out of. There's the young woman. There. Yeah, you also notice he's aiming at the.
What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here in the street corner,
Okay. All right. So yeah, so that's the program, that's meant to give you kind of indication of the program, what our hypothetic model is. And I'm going to share a little bit of our preliminary results, our more quantitative results. So now from here out, it's about support, seeing if we can find support for that quantitatively. And let me just tell you right now that we have found some, what I would call partial support, and this is sort of what I mean. It's a work in progress. There are still things that we're trying to figure out how to operationalize. So, for example, we've figured out how to operationalize fixation, but are currently working on the best way to operationalize disorganization. So I don't have anything to share with you about that other than what we saw. So I'm going to share with you two analyses. One that was sort of my primary, analysis, which is what I'm going to share right now. And the second one was actually one that was led by two of my students who were doing an independent study with me, and we're doing a secondary analysis of the data. And this is a registered hypothesis that they tested, and they didn't find what they were looking for, but they found some interesting things. So I'm going to share those really briefly, and then I just have a couple of discussion points. All right, so yeah, this is sort of that model in play, one of those paths. This is what does physiological stress lead to people fixating, and does that in turn lead to outcomes? The outcome variable here is just simply the percentage of unarmed Black suspects that are shot. To keep it simple, the independent variable is the amount of stress they're experiencing measured by heart rate variability. And the mediator here is dwell time, which is operationalized as the longest string of seconds that is kept on the suspect. I don't know if I said that well. Like, we know when they're looking at the suspect. Let's say they're looking around, and then around second 8, they look at the suspect, and then they look and they don't move their view for like 15 seconds, then they get a score of 15. All right, so that's fixation. Yeah, so when I do this again, we've filmed all these scenes with white suspects, all these scenes with black suspects. Yeah, so no direct relationship. Stress was not related to, higher percentages of shooting unarmed black suspects. However, yeah, the more people were stressed out, the more they fixated on black suspects. And in turn, the more they fixated on black suspects, the more likely they were to shoot. The higher percentage of unarmed black male suspects were shot. And this is supported as a partial mediation. And then I did this as a second analysis. I did this with white suspects, and these are just non-significant relations here. Okay, so then the second analysis, which was one that was hypothesized by 2 of my students, Jackie Wadidis and Sophia Lewis. One of the other things we did was we collected a survey which included an implicit association test. And so they've had access to that data, and what they proposed to look at was implicit association test as a predictor. So higher scores on this mean more bias towards African Americans, or less preference towards African Americans. Implicit bias towards Black or African Americans is the independent variable. We're using the same fixation dwell time as a mediator, and the outcome in this case that they were interested in is reaction time. And they predicted that the more bias people, the more implicit bias they had towards African Americans, the faster the reaction times would be, and that would be mediated dwell time. And as I mentioned, their main hypothesis is not supported. So as a counterbalance to this, we also do this same design with the white suspects, just as I did. And check this out, and this was really surprising. So this, I think, needs a little bit of interpretation. That's a positive correlation. In other words, the more bias people had towards Black or African Americans using the implicit association test, the longer their reaction time was towards white suspects. So it's acting on how they act towards the white suspects, and the less time they spent looking at white suspects. So one kind of obvious thing here is that this could be an indication of like presumption of innocence. I don't need to, if I have this bias already, I don't need to look at white suspects as much. It's not a mediating effect. These would be 2 independent outcomes. Yeah. All right. So that's all I want to share. I just have a couple of discussion points that'll probably take me 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'd really like to open it up to questions. The more I look at this, and the more I do the study and the more I collect samples with diverse participant pools, Mount Holyoke College students, criminal justice majors, these are pervasive results, and they continue to emerge. And the more I feel concerned about what we might call like the racist cop narrative. And I want to be really clear here. George Floyd's murderer is a racist. And that is, and I, for a second, would think that, and would support the idea that he is doing that because he's fueled by racial hate. So that happens, undoubtedly. And so my point is not to make that go away, but my fear is that if our action and the sort of public call to action is say, put that guy in jail. Yeah, sure, put him in jail. Okay, but that's not the solution to the problem. Like just removing these racist cops is not the problem, because this can also happen as we've seen, anybody can be in these shoes. Our students at Mount Holyoke College could be in these shoes where you're suddenly making these decisions and that are fueled by implicit biases. You don't want to make those decisions. And so my concern is this kind of focus on a select officer or two and getting them locked up underscores just how pervasive this problem is. How, in my mind, if you watch Netflix or you watch YouTube, you're downloading negative stereotypes of Black men and women. And then if you're in a position where you need to make split-second decisions, you may act on those whether you want to or not. This isn't to replace the notion of race scouts, but to shift that narrative a little bit, that this is a very pervasive problem. The other thing is that I feel hopeful about as we continue to do this research is continuing to understand how cognition and affect work together to result in these decisions. And there's nothing particularly new about that in psychology. And I like that, because to me that suggests there's so much research, for example, on cognitive behavioral therapy. We know so much about it. We know where and when it can be successful. So that's such a resource that's available to tap into, I think, in terms of interventions, in terms of understanding how to intervene, how to, for example, help an officer detect, their own level of stress when they're becoming dysregulated, maybe to become conscious of when you're beginning to be disorganized in your attention patterns or when you're fixating, and then interrupt those. These are all like very basic cognitive behavioral skills, and the application could be very promising. All right, I'd love to just end there and take any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really fascinating. I saw Dr. Tawa speak about similar research at an APA tech conference, and I was really intrigued by this. And I'm intrigued by how you're using kind of traditional methodology and concepts and combining that with emerging technology to understand real life challenges as relates, in this case, to bias and behavior. So thank you. It's fascinating. So we're going to open this up for questions. If you have a question for Dr. Tawa, if you could please put that in the chat box with a prefix, Q or question, so I know to differentiate it from a comment. Well, one question I have, since I'm not seeing questions come up, I hope people are able, I see people have commented to me privately. I see a question coming in, but one question I have for you, Dr. Tawa, is if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into this work, especially the use of VR. I think it's important. There's a lot of students on the line from NJIT, various programs, as well as other universities. And, combining your traditional psych background with emerging technology, what moved you to go into that direction?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ansys. Yeah, undoubtedly the primary drive is just continuing to see on my social media feed these videos and just not being able to shake it and wanting to do something about it. And I had been doing research primarily in race relations, Black Asian relations, and intergroup psychology primarily. And in that work, had done a lot of stuff with virtual, not virtual reality, but like desktop virtual environments like Second Life to simulate social interactions. And that had just been fruitful. I'll be honest here, fun, kind of playing around with, new technology. But beyond that, I think just finding that it was able, to tell us something that we didn't already know about intergroup interactions, because you can model. I mean, Second Life is a strange place, but for intergroup psychology, it's fascinating. You can have people from all over the world meet and interact in groups of 20, and you can record their movements in relationship to each other very acutely. And yeah, I just found, that I was able to learn things that we couldn't learn through self-report and interviews. And knew that I wanted to bridge into VR. And once I got to Mount Holyoke College and was supported in that line of research, I thought, yeah, this is something that has been on my mind quite a bit, and couldn't we learn quite a bit from it? And I've said this already, but part of this was also growing confidence in terms of like connecting with a couple. I can't do any of this. I don't know how to program any of this stuff. I just, could imagine how it plays out. And so kind of meeting with some CS students, like, would this be possible? And having them turn it around within a week or so, and just kind of, it's all magic to me. But just kind of becoming more and more comfortable with that, like, relying on on our great students in the computer science department, and just finding that I really enjoyed those collaborations. And also learning that the computer science students, and what I was hearing from them, were just kind of dying to do something. I mean, they're developing these amazing skills, and we're kind of just dying to do something socially relevant with it. And so it's yeah.
Thank you. So we have questions coming in. One question is from Jan Tyson Roberts, and she asks, I perform pre-employment evaluations for police officer candidates. Do you have any insight on how psychologists might assess for fluid attention or racial bias?
Thank you for your question. I don't know. I want to say that that's what we're going towards with this program. As I've said, we are, we have a kind of sense of how to assess fixation. We are working on developing this organization. And the other thing I just want to say here is we haven't done it yet. So it's at this point still a hypothesis. Seems right. It seems like a healthy adapted, and we seem to see it, but I'd really want to continue to support that hypothesis before I was comfortable sort of saying this or a similar kind of tool would be good for it. But I think that the point is a good one, is that's exactly the kind of direction we would like to go with something like this, where it could be an assessment tool for bias. More than that, I like the idea of it being like an assessment, not to just say, hey, you have bias, that it's like, here's something that seems to be happening in your particular psychology that's leading to bad decisions. When you are becoming anxious, it seems like you're becoming very disorganized. Hey, you've heard of biofeedback. Hey, look at this screen recording of you leading up to this bad decision. And then suddenly the officer says, yeah, that I can see where that's problematic. Let me begin to become self-reflective and know when I'm doing that. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think assessment of bias could come more easily and probably more reliably with something like the Corral paradigm. But I think the value of something like this would be being able to get a look inside the person's psychology. I really appreciate that question. Thank you.
So Dr. Nancy Stephan Fleur is asking, do you know the work of Michael Brownstein on implicit bias? And more centrally, have you worked with police agencies on behavioral conditioning to counter implicit bias? We know that implicit bias is very difficult to reduce.
Thanks, great question. And I don't know the work of Michael Brownstein. And before I leave, I'd like to share my email address because if there's some very relevant work that I should be looking at, I would love to have access to that. So thank you very much. Yeah, this, and I think I said this, but I hope, I wanted to make clear that this is with a sample of criminal justice majors, and the initial intent here was, before doing these analyses and looking for outlets for them, was to collect data with police academies or police departments, and I have a grant to support that. Coronavirus really put a halt on that, which was both bad and good. Well, it's bad. Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is a headset, so the idea of like sharing a headset, we can clean it between it, but I think there's a lot of hesitation to it. There's a lot of hesitation even without the concerns about the virus, just in terms of how this data is going to be used. And so there's a lot of hurdles to it. What it did do was make me say, hey, I've got to do with what I have at the moment. So we've actually begun these analyses earlier than I would have. But yeah, that's the next step. I've gotten a 1-year extension on that grant for now. I really hope that I'm able to make use of it, and do this with both seasoned police officers and those in the academy.
Another question from Tennille. Do you think that this research could be analyzed on middle schoolers or pre-adolescents to see if implicit racial bias could begin that young?
Yeah, boy, I don't know. I mean, these are, I guess one thing I just want to point out is the level of anxiety that people feel when they're in these, and it surprised me, just, even during our pilot studies, just seeing the level of anxiety. I mean, we had a handful of people, of course, we invited them to stop if they were feeling overwhelmed, and I was surprised by the number of people that actually did. There's something about the 360-degree environment where you don't, and also there's something about not knowing who the suspect is necessarily, the way, like, for example, in the Corral program, which I want to reiterate, it's been extremely valuable to understand, but the person in the middle is the person you're making the decision about. You don't know, for example, like in the scene with the young woman sitting on the stairs crying, you don't know if she's going to be the suspect or the big, right? And so there's a lot of unknowns, and so there's the scanning. And so I just would caution that, that it is pretty stressful. I was really surprised by how stressed out people would be.
Dina, who I think is trying to log in with her computer, but Dina, you're going to have to log in, and I'm not seeing you in the waiting room, but I'm going to ask her a question because I think she's on her phone. She's asking, how does CBT address the problems in the infrastructure of law enforcement? So related to a previous comment, I think she's questioning, if I understand this correctly, the use of CBT as one solution, if you will.
Yeah, thanks, Dina. I don't think it does. I think you're right on that. This isn't the answer to the problem. This is one leg of it. I think you're absolutely right that the problem of police violence towards the Black community has to be addressed at multiple levels. It has to be addressed systemically. And my focus is simply, with this program, my focus is simply on that individual level training. It's a great question to sort of illustrate the limitations here.
Okay, Dr. Azar Eftekar is asking, can you please tell us some key findings from your paper below, and tell us how VR can better explain and test the findings, dimensions of racial essentialism and racial nominalism?
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe you need another hour seminar for that next semester.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Essentialism is another line of work that I've done, and one that I found reaching into the other areas of work. So I, for example, have included that scale that I developed in this data set. I haven't done analyses on them. So that scale measures various beliefs that people have about the concept of race. And so it's not a measure of racism. It's the measure of the extent to which people think, for example, that races constitute different species, that races are genetically distinct from one another, that races are not genetically distinct, but that they are phenotypically distinct from one another, and then that races have distinct inherent behavioral patterns. And then the nominalism component is the extent to which people understand that race is sociopolitically constructed. I've just, and I'll just say that this body of research is relatively new in psychology, but it's growing rapidly, and the findings are kind of across, I'm not talking about my research, but across the field, are really persistent, that people's belief that races are biologically distinct is a predictor of so many intergroup variables. People's willingness to accept friendships, people's tendency to punish, people's memory for faces, people's level of physiological stress when interacting with outgroup members. It's a really strong predictor. One of the things I really like about it, and feel a lot of promises, that there's not sort of a social desirability effect that would happen if you're trying to measure prejudice directly. Hey, on a scale from 1 to 10, how racist are you? People generally feel that's what race is. It's not a racism, it's just a belief about race. Well, so it kind of avoids that, and it's just been very predictive. What would the hypotheses be? Frankly, more sort of biological belief in race, maybe emphasize, more bias in police shooting, faster reaction times, less attention to white suspects, and the gamut. Thank you for that question.
Okay, we have one more minute, one more question from Anas Rashid. How soon do you think VR would be implemented into professional training programs for law enforcement?
I believe it already is. I believe so. There's and not only that, but in ways that are more sophisticated in terms of the interaction than what I've done here. What I mean by that is, and I don't remember the name of it, but there's a pretty commonly used program that actually, it's like, I don't mean to belittle it by calling it like a choose your own adventure, but I think you understand what I mean, that if you do one thing, then this will happen in the scenario if you do another. And I think, so part of the idea behind that is that it enables, I see somebody saying it's an excellent tool. So maybe somebody knows what the name of it is. But what I think is really promising about that is that you can work on de-escalation. In my program, that's not what I'm saying. You can't, maybe the right answer is not to shoot or not shoot, it's to de-escalate. You can't do that. And so there are actually very sophisticated programs that enable that. Again, what I've done here is kind of just try to zero in on those seconds before the decision is made to shoot.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Tawa. This was very fascinating, interesting research and important research that you're conducting. Thank you for speaking with us today. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. It's very nice.
Please join us for our next session, which is Tuesday, November 10th at 9 a.m. with Dr. Corinne Dachi, and she will be talking about telebehavioral health with couples, technological and treatment opportunities. So please sign up on Eventbrite and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Dr. Ansis.
Thank you.